Right, so to you, democracy is like an illusion? If that's true, what are our actual circumstances?
I think our actual circumstances as of the 21st century is that democratic processes are illusory and that the world actually functions on a hidden form of feudalism.
Feudalism, really? How do you define this feudalism?
Feudalism in medieval Europe was a sort of relationship between a lord and vassal. Lower classes would serve higher ones. I think what happened is that feudalism never really ended, it just evolved into a higher form of itself, whereupon what we could term noble houses, house names of nobility vying for control and competing for power on the world stage. I believe they covertly moved democratic process to their ultimate advantage by installing puppet regimes. I mean, say what you will about Biden or his career, but I think we can all agree that since the man is approaching mental invalidity, that there is no way he is actually a functional president. I think Biden is simply the puppet of who really controls America, and, by extension, all other nations. It is the ultra-rich who conceal their existence from the masses.
Right. And what do you mean by concealing their existence?
Well, we as a society have no real idea who the richest people in the world are. We know who some ultra-rich individuals are, but their presence in the public sphere indicates echelons above themselves that hide from observation by the general public. You know, we also have no idea how these individuals acquired their wealth. And I think what we can extrapolate from this is that the ultra-rich prefer to obscure their existence so they can manipulate world events from the shadows.
So what you're saying is our democratic institutions are actually the tools of manipulating the masses to conform society to the will of the ultra-rich.
Exactly, yes. I think that the ultra-rich would prefer to remain ultra-rich. And so anything which threatens the actual system of feudal families can be terminated or subverted to ultimately serve the will of said families. And they don't want us to evolve beyond this society's current version because it would disempower their control over the human race.
So basically, what you're telling us is that democracy is an illusion, and we're all actually peasants in a highly advanced form of feudalism, serving lords we do not know exist.
Yeah, precisely. It's like if there was a king of the world, the safest way for him to exist would be for almost no one to know he was king. So since we do not know who the king of the world is, but we can presume there is a king in this feudal system, then that king has every interest in remaining obscure. Because if the world was to find the king of the world, we would question his right to rule. This king, or potentially queen, royal figure, we'll say, is the one who ultimately installs the puppet regimes like Biden. I mean, I think what Biden has proved is that a golden retriever could be the president and could achieve the same task because the president doesn't actually rule over anything.
That's really startling. If a president is merely an instrument of this king of the world to enforce his royal rule to keep the machinery of the feudal system operating, why do you think they go to such great lengths to obscure their existence? Why don't they want the world to know democracy is an illusion, and probably always was?
Plato's analogy of the cave is that in ignorance or obliviousness, we humans can mistake a perception of reality for reality itself. Or we're watching shadows on the wall cast by fires we cannot see, and we're mistaking these shadows for legitimate reality. So democratic institutions are like these shadows, with their origin point being the feudal families fighting to retain control over humanity. So by coming out of the cave of believing democracy is real, we can enter in the real world. We were sold shadows as reality.
So, like we were talking about Dune earlier, what do you think of Dune's applicability to all we've established so far in this theoretical framework of how society really functions?
You take like the Bene Gesserit, that's a hidden society that secretly orchestrates the rest of society to its will. And the Bene Gesserit are highly insular, highly secretive and highly manipulative and operate in subterfuge and espionage, meaning the Bene Gesserit are the ones who ultimately control universal society because in June they decide what bloodlines continue, what noble houses will marry into and combine with other houses, and they also decide when a bloodline should be extinguished. I think such an organization likely exists in our own world, because it makes sense to me that if there is a king of the world, someone bred him to be king.
So what you suggest is that, even at the top echelon of this hidden society, that a further society hidden within it manipulates its leader into cohering the world to their will.
Yes. Like in June, the Emperor of the Universe has no idea his daughter is loyal to the Bene Gesserit before himself and will put her order before his imperium. So even if you're the king of the world, if the Reverend Mother of the Bene Gesserit decides it, your power can end immediately and abruptly should the Bene Gesserit decide that king is no longer suitable for the position of power. So it's like you don't uprise against the emperor, you're rising up against his council, who are really the ones in charge. I think that's what June was saying, is they who decide what noble bloods continue will be the deciders of the destinies of those noble bloodlines. So in reality, the ultra-rich only enjoy a relative freedom, because at any instant, any house can be dissolved to suit the whims of the Reverend Mother, who might be the actual charge of this world.
Do you believe in a solution to how society functions in this despairing and detrimental way, which seems to hold back the potential of the majority of the species by enslaving them to poverty and circumstances of criminality, which encourage the already established institutions to continue depriving people of the free will to decide their own destinies?
Well, like you look at June, and that's like thousands of years in the future. I think Frank Herbert was saying was that this is how society functions, and we cannot destroy it without also destroying our society. Like, say, everyone had access to housing, food, education, and the necessities of life, then people could theoretically make scientific discoveries which would upend the societal structure. Your cars that run on water and energy derived from nothing, for example, 0-point energy has a lot of credence for potential existence, but most scientists who research it end up dead if they make any progress. That makes sense if you think about the idea the automotive industry and, by the extension, the oil industry are methods of oppressing humanity to an outdated and outmoded system of energy production that requires the combustion of long extinct organisms. I think what these people want is ultimately irrelevant to the reality. They do not have best interests at heart. In fact, these ultra-rich elites probably despise humanity. My reason for believing so is that if even an iota of what I know to be conspiratorially true, like, say, your Epstein's island and whatnot, if any that is true at all, then the ultra-rich are not only misanthropic, they're actively satanic. I believe this because I think power attracts the insane, and I think you have to be insane to want power, because power seems to destroy everything it touches that is not itself. Ultimately, these people may think they run the world, but they are too slaves of the system, which they think liberates them. The reason is thus: if you cannot decide your own destiny, then you are slave of others, irrespective of how much wealth you have. Because what is the use of that wealth if it cannot liberate you from the control of echelons above yourself on the hierarchy?
So maybe the key to the liberation of the human race from the control of the feudal elite is not in rising against them in some violent revolution, but instead changing their perspective on life to be one truer and more aligned with reality. That being that everything in life experiences unity, and we're all a single species of consciousness. And maybe if they saw that, it would be impossible for them to do what they do.
So maybe in that way, the feudal elite are actually the ones most imprisoned by this system because they cannot live freely or openly with regular society, unwilling to part with what might be generations of inherited wealth and the power therein. The feudal elite seek to perpetuate the cycle of war and division because a united humanity would be able to rise against and ultimately overthrow and dismantle their power structure. Till then, we can only speculate on what the future may hold.
Indeed, as a great poet once said, we must emancipate ourselves from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our mind. We hope you free your minds, ladies and gentlemen of the simulation. Till we meet again, farewell.
Cheers.